Hello, welcome to my presentation on the Little Indians book. I chose the short story, The Search Engine, only because I felt that the search engine did a pretty good job at keeping identity as the theme for the majority of the story. So let's continue. Um, so First comes when she first starts categorizing and talking about herself. Not only does she start talking about herself, but she begins with herself when she was a kid. Um, Everything else in the story before this has been in the third person and has been very objective. This is when she starts really identifying herself. Um, Also to include that regardless of what class you are, in regards to economy, class will always have to do a lot with how you identify yourself and will give you a more insight of how that person grew up and the environment um, they grew up in. Also, as some low middle class people may assume that there is a destiny that you will have, and you're unable to break that destiny because you come from generations of people who don't go out of the comfort zone and do bigger and better things with their life. And that's not true. Everyone has the capability of making something of themselves, whether that's something big in the world or just big in their world. Um, so that's that one. Our next one, we're gonna talk kind of similar to the past slide, and that is another piece of evidence that contributes to her being an Indian and now coming from generations of traditions, culture, value, that were really all based on ancestors of her family. It says right here in the quote, her parents, grandparents, and great grandparents were all born and raised on the Spokane Indian Reservation, and the rest of her ancestors, going back a dozen generations, were born and raised on the land that would eventually be the same reservation that her grandparents, parents, and great grandparents lived on. So it's almost a burden when you feel like you're not attached to the culture and to the history of your family and your past, and you want to be, but you just feel so different and you just have all these different values. And that's exactly what she was feeling as she was introducing her point of view in the story. So this quote, it says the huge number of books confirmed how much magic she had been denied for most of her life, and now she hungrily wanted to read every book on the shelf. So this kind of ties back to her traditions and things. She came from a family, again, who would only really go into hard labor work and not really make too much of themselves, but would be able to make an income. Does that make sense? And based on the closed life that she was living and the limited resources and um really lifestyle that she had, I can only imagine that this was a core memory for her, that it was something that just blew her mind away, that contributed to who she was and helped form that bookworm that is has always been inside of her. um And then we're going more into her college life, and she kind of talks about the ideal roommate that she wants. And that is She didn't want to live with another Indian roommate. Corliss knew she'd soon be taking in the roommate's cousin, little brother, half uncle, and long lost dog, and none of them would contribute anything toward the recent order toward, I think that's supposed to say to the rent. My apologies. To the rent, other than wispy apologies. So that definitely sounds like some personal experience there. I know in the past readings that Indians tend to have bigger families and they're all crowded in this house. Um, and she feels like she wants to get away from that. She wants to get away from any reminder of that family that she feels she's disconnected to. Um, which is totally understandable. So this, again, she's having to come face to face with um that reality of who she identifies as and what she thinks she is and what she wants to categorize other Indians as, and it's just its own thing. So even though she grew up in a very big family, it was said in the book that she dreamed of solitude. She cherished her domestic solitude and kept it scared. Scared. I don't know how you say that. And so that one again is just another one of who she is, regardless of, who she came from and things of that nature. So she just liked being alone. She liked her own personal space. When she finds the book in the library, kind of she relates it as a lifesaver. So this kind of relates back to how she wasn't confident in herself. She thought what she liked was wrong because nobody in her family had shared the same interest, and even though her family was paying for it all, um it was very patchy, the support. Like her mom would support her but her dad didn't, so it was like if she would have known that there was someone else with the same problem or similar problems, she wouldn't have felt so alone. That's kind of relating to the next, actually, too. No, I'm sorry. These all kind of tie together with identity and things like that. Um, this one says, because she was an Indian displaced by colonial rule, Corliss had always been approximately homeless. Like the homeless, she lived a dangerous and random life. So with this one, I actually would say that it has more to do with the home that you find comfort in. So there's a phrase that I was told that said, a house doesn't make a home. So you can find that comfort and that love in what you would find a home in a person. You can find it in a place, you could find it in a song. And she couldn't find that safe place, that happy place where you go, that home. People a lot of times thinks that home means house, and it really means something much greater than that. So this one, mind the picture. This one is a little bit more deeper. This was when she had met the author for the first time, and she had set up these expectations for him to be this glorious guy and knowing all the right answers and being able to answer all the right questions. And she was disappointed to find out that, for starters, he was weak. It had seemed that he didn't want to be bothered. It had seemed that he wasn't this grand author, you know, that they thought that he was. And and she was disappointed. She was rethinking her life. Like, she had thought that she found this book that was going to be able to change her life, and now the person that wrote it wasn't what she thought, and she was having an identity crisis. This one is when they're talking, and he's pretty much explaining to her why he wrote the book, and that's because he couldn't categorize or identify himself as an Indian. So what he tried to do is try to make it seem as if he was Indian, through his writings. And he felt like he was an outsider of his own culture, and he couldn't identify with them, but what he tried to do was try to identify them through the poetry. Another one that kind of, the last one, is about who he was himself, and that was someone who was adopted by white parents, but yet wanted to be educated on his culture and tried to do that by making it seem like he knew what he was talking about through poetry. And I'm sure at one point he would have an identity crisis as well, not knowing who he was and if he belonged and if he was an outsider, and how different he must have felt. And then this is where I got all my info. Thank you much.